Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Today's scriptures from Matthew 13, verses 1 through 9. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his word.
In his book, Halftime, Bob Buford shares the epitaph that he wants one day to appear on his gravestone. The epitaph that he hopes to put on his gravestone one day is 100X. 100X, he says, represents the kind of soil that he hopes to be. It's a reference to the parable that Carol just read for us, that he hopes to be the kind of soil that receives all the blessings that God has given him, but returns them 100 times back to his Maker. And he acknowledges, as soon as he says that's his goal, he says it is a lofty goal. Because when you start to think about all the blessings that we have received, I mean, just think for a moment about all the blessings you have received. What would it look like to return that around 100 times? He says that's the point. Not that I'll ever reach that goal, but having that as a goal makes me ask a crucial question. How do I have to begin to live differently in order to return that kind of blessing to others? And that's the question I hope that we'll be thinking about over the next 5-6 weeks of Lent. How do we live in such a way that we could return to our Maker the kind of harvest that Jesus describes in that parable? It's a crucial question, right? And I think a lot of times when we ask that question, we tend to think, well, the answer is that we have to be a certain kind of soil. That's the interpretation, in fact, that Jesus gives. He says there are 4 different kinds of soil, and one soil is too hard, and this word, the seed of the word of the kingdom just bounces right off. It never even gets into the heart. He says that another kind of soil, it's too shallow. The seed grows fast, but it never develops a root structure, and so when hard times come, when tribulations come, it withers. The plant doesn't last very long. He says another kind of soil, it's cluttered with weeds. These are the concerns and cares of the world that choke the growth of the seed. And so there's only one out of every 4, he says, that is the fertile ground, the heart that is soft and deep and clear to receive the seed and then to return a harvest 30, 60, 100-fold. So I think that's the way we tend to think about it, is, Lord, help us to be that kind of seed. The challenge I have with that interpretation is that it still puts the focus on receiving. But remember what Bob said, it wasn't just about receiving. It's also about returning what we've received and multiplying it and sharing it with others. Scholars point out that Jesus' interpretation of this parable, if you were to read the book of Matthew, the parable when he tells it and then his interpretation, they are separated by about 10 verses. And so scholars say this probably indicates that these are two separate streams of tradition that Matthew has sewn together, that it's possible to interpret the story of the parable of the sower from a different perspective, that it is possible that it's not just about what kind of seed are you, but it might be about the seed of the kingdom, like the mustard seed or the yeast that also appear in Matthew 13. Bountiful harvest, huge results that come from small sources. So what I want to do this morning is I want you for a second not to think of yourself as what kind of soil are you, but I want you to place yourself differently in the story. I want to ask the question, what kind of sower are you? Because I think all of us, to some degree, we are sowers. We all invest our time, our energy, our resources in the world, and we're all hoping for that some kind of return, or 100x perhaps, or maybe a smaller return, but we're hoping to receive some return, to leave behind some blessing for others. So what kind of sower are you, and what lessons could you learn from the sower in today's story? Well, the first thing I notice about this sower is he's pretty indiscriminate with where he flings the seeds. I mean, the seeds just go in all directions, and 3 out of 4 seeds don't land on good ground. He almost is wasteful with the seed. It makes you ask the question, why does the sower cast his seed where he knows it can't grow? On the hard soil or in the land that's choked with weeds. Why doesn't he just save the seed and put it in the good spots, the good soil? Wouldn't that be more efficient? Well, it seems to indicate to me that you don't know where the good soil is all the time. I mean, I think we tend to judge and try to assess who's worthy of our investment of time and energy and resources. But this story cuts against that. It says, if you want to be a good sower, you cast your seed everywhere because you never know where you're going to find the good soil. And it might just be sometimes that you find a harvest in the most unsurprising, or in the most surprising places, the most unexpected places. Let me tell you the story of Jean-Baptiste. Jean-Baptiste was a student of mine back when I taught English in Haiti about 15 years ago. There's a picture of me. You go ahead and laugh at the hair. It's okay. And those students, none of those are Jean-Baptiste. That's Enel, Luc, Nair, and Willie. They were my star English students. Jean-Baptiste was not a star student. He was, in fact, very challenged academically. Let's just say it that way. He was a good kid. A smart, a sweet, respectful kid. I remember once he met my mom, and my mom came to visit me down in Haiti. And so every time afterwards that I talked to him, he always asked, how's your mother doing? Is her health good? And that always made a positive impression on me. I was always rooting for Jean-Baptiste. He just never came through. When on his tests, his homework, he just wasn't a very academic kid. And in fact, at the end of that first year, he flunked out. He failed most of his classes, and he would have had to repeat the grade. He came to me that summer, and he said, Professor David, that's what they all called me, Professor David. He said, my family doesn't have the money to send me back to school to repeat a grade. They won't send me back to school this year. But there's a vocational school in the nearby town of Laogon, which is kind of a tap-tap ride down the mountain, about a 30-minute ride away. He said there's a vocational school, and they have a program where you can learn to be a mechanic. And I've always liked cars and trucks. I like to tinker with them, and I could do this maybe as a job, or I could even become a driver, a chauffeur to drive people around. And so, will you help me go to school? Now, this is the first time that Jamelin and I had been approached, and that request came to us. It's since happened many, many times, but this was the first. And I said, how much would it cost? He said, well, maybe, he showed me the information for the school. It's about $200 a year. I said, okay. And how many years? 3 years. Okay, we'll help you finish school so you can become a mechanic. Now, I had no idea when I made that agreement what I was getting into. Because it wasn't just the school fees. We had to, give him supplies, tools, and what have you. There were extra costs for inscription and graduation and school uniforms and different things like that. And so the cost kept piling up. And then after he graduated, it wasn't like there was a job immediately waiting for him. Jean-Baptiste struggled to get a job, and so he kept coming back to us saying, well, maybe if I do this course, this extra class to specialize in this or specialize in that, then I can get a job. So we kept funding him for a few few more years. And then finally, I think about 4 years after we left Haiti, we were just like, okay, Jean-Baptiste, we're done. We can't keep putting money into this. We've helped you finish your education. It's time for you to be on your own. And we did this partially because there were other kids who were coming to us, some of whom were, truth be told, much better students, and they were asking us for help to finish, further their education. So we said it's time for us to spread it around and invest elsewhere. But you've got all the training you need, Jean-Baptiste. Go do it. Well, for the next year, 18 months or so, every time I went to Haiti, I saw Jean-Baptiste. He was hanging around in Abatunel. Abatunel is the place where the valley that we lived in, the road coming up from the valley met the main road that was going from Léogâne to Jacmel. And there was a gas station there, and it was a kind of a tap and bus drop-off pickup location. There were always people around, just kind of hanging around, and Jean-Baptiste was one of them. He didn't have a job. He was always just kind of sitting around. He always said hello to us, and we talked to him for a little bit, but yeah, he wasn't doing anything. He was, maybe if a tap broke down, he had a little quick job that way, or he changed oil for someone, but there was no steady source of income. And every time I saw him, I would just think, man, all that investment wasted. That was a lot of money, and we could have put it anywhere, and it was frustrating. Well, then 5 years after we left Haiti, in 2010, Jamelyn was in Haiti leading a mission trip, and it was January, and the earthquake happened. And Jamelyn and her team, that's the picture of the guest house where they were staying after the earthquake. Luckily, the team wasn't in the guest house when it collapsed, so they were safe. But they had nowhere to go. They slept on the street, kind of on the road. They pulled pallets and mattresses out of the guest house, and neighbors kind of cooked spaghetti and everything for the first 2 days, but the team knew they couldn't stay there, or else they just keep draining the resources of our neighbors. And they weren't sure what to do, and so Jamelyn, they were collecting as much information they could about what was happening in the country, and they knew that there was no safe way to get down the mountain because the road had washed out a handful of places. But they got word that it was possible. Cars couldn't get down, but motos could. And there were always a handful of motorcycles up at Abatunel, that same place where Jean-Baptiste hung out. And so Thursday morning, the earthquake happened on Tuesday. Thursday morning, Jamelyn got up and went to the top of the mountain. And she said, I didn't know who I was going to find, what I was looking for, but I was looking for motos. And instead, who I saw was Jean-Baptiste. And when I saw Jean-Baptiste, I went straight to him and I said, Jean-Baptiste, we need 5 motos. I need your best drivers. People who can get us down off this mountain. Fine. And then she said, I grabbed him and said, remember, I'm Madame David. I'm Professor David's wife. You got to take care of us. And he said, yes, ma'am, I will. And sure enough, he arranged 5 motos to get our 10 team members down the mountain. Now, you want to tell me that the $1,000 we invested in Jean-Baptiste didn't come back? 100-fold, if not more. You never know where you're going to find the good soil. You never know where God is going to produce an unexpected harvest. So we have to just keep sowing and sowing and sowing until our seed finds the fertile ground. So the first lesson of the sower is we have to be indiscriminate, casting our seed everywhere. And the second thing I think we learn is that we have to be persevering. We can't give up the way I almost gave up with Jean-Baptiste. You can't give up casting the seed. You think about the sower, 3 out of 4 seeds, that's not a very good return. 3 out of 4 seeds fell on harsh, hostile ground. It would have been so easy for him to give up. For us, I think most of us, if we invest, if you've ever invested your time, your energy, your love into someone else and they've disappointed you, it hurts. It's painful. And I think so what most of us do is we tend to close ourselves off. We say, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to keep investing myself there. I'm not going to keep throwing good money after bad. But sometimes you have to keep sowing and sowing and sowing, because just like you never know where you're going to find fertile soil, you also don't know when you're going to find it. I have a friend who, a decade ago, went through a really terrible divorce. I mean, just a really terrible divorce. And he and his wife had 3 young children. Well, the oldest of which wasn't quite that young anymore. She was a preteen, starting to enter into those teen years. And it was such a kind of a nasty divorce that the children became kind of pawns or caught in that tug of war. And in particular, he lost his relationship with his oldest daughter. She blamed him for what took place. She wanted nothing to do with him. And so this relationship was suddenly cut off. And you know, I don't know the full story. I only know his experience. But I know that, like, whenever it was his turn to have the kids, she wouldn't go with him. There was always an excuse, a school activity or trip or someone, you know, a sickness, not feeling well, or sometimes just a blatant refusal, I'm not going with you. And that was hard. He would take the other 2 kids, of course, and he would love them the best he could. And he would always try to communicate his love to his daughter, but he also wanted to honor her need for space. He didn't want to force something if she wasn't ready for it. But he always kept the hope open. I remember he built a new home during this time. And when he built a new home, he set up a room for his daughter. Even though she wasn't coming to his house, he said, this is always going to be her room until she comes and fills it. And I don't remember exactly what it was that started to turn that tide. I mean, it started slowly. It wasn't like a single event, but it started slowly where she started reaching out to him with texts and just, you know, telling him about her day or asking for his opinion or asking for his advice on how she should handle a certain situation. And then she started coming over to his house, and not just coming over to his house, but even inviting friends over. And then she started inviting him to school events and activities that she was involved with. And now, you know, he said the real, you know, kind of breakthrough came when she got her own car. Because then she had freedom, and he said it was the awesome day. If she would come to my house when it wasn't on her scheduled day, and she'd come to visit, and it was, you know, it was exactly what I always wanted. Now she's in college, and he has the relationship that he's always wanted with his daughter. They text, they talk all the time. She comes home for holidays. I remember when things first started changing, I asked him, I said, you know, or I don't even remember what I said, but I said, I made a remark like, man, I bet you're glad that you didn't give up all those years. And he looked back at me and he said, Dave, it's my daughter. I'd never give up. I had to keep loving her and loving her and loving her, and I knew someday that wall would come down. Sometimes we have to keep sowing in the exact same place, in the exact same relationship, in the exact same opportunity, because what seems like a closed door now may open. What seems like a hard heart right now may someday soften. And if we don't keep sowing and sowing and sowing, we'll miss that opportunity. So we're called to be indiscriminate sowers. We're called to be persevering in sowing God's love. And lastly, I think we're called to be faithful, because we never know what God is going to do with our seed. There's a gap. Anytime you plant seeds, there's a gap in time between when you plant and when you see the results. There's a line from Hamilton, the musical, where Alexander Hamilton asked the question. He says, what is a legacy? He said, it's sowing seeds in a garden that you never get to see. There's a gap in time between our planting and when the harvest comes. And the question always is, what do we do with that gap? Do we fill it with faith? Do we fill it with prayer? The reality is we are in control of very little when it comes to the harvest. Our job is to plant seeds. It's God who brings about the harvest. It's God who brings the sun, who brings the rain, who creates the conditions for the harvest to grow. He brings that about. Our job is simply to plant and plant and plant and trust that God will do his part. There's studies done about what kind of harvests were typical in Jesus' day and time. How would the people who have first heard Jesus' words, how would they hear them? For starters, you have to remember in the first century, it wasn't like today. It was not farming was not a big tech business, There weren't big combines and soil testing and as much fertilizer and genetically engineered seeds. You didn't go to the store and buy a bag of seeds. You actually saved seed from the previous year's harvest, and that's what you use to plant. In fact, still in Haiti, that's exactly what they do. They save their seed and then plant that all over again. And so what kind of harvest was typical in those days? Well, sociological studies show that typically, in that day and time, you could expect to harvest about 5 to 10 times what was planted. That was an average harvest, 5 to 10 times. A bumper crop would have been like getting 15 times what was planted. So when Jesus gives this description of a harvest, and he says 30 times, double what you could imagine, 60 times, 4 times, 100 times what was sown. I mean, it's the stuff of fantasy. It's so fantastical, so amazing that no farmer listening could say, that's not even possible. In fact, the only time that you find an ancient record of a harvest of 100 times what was sown is in the Old Testament, the book of Genesis. Isaac one year receives a harvest of 100-fold. And that's Jesus' point, that God is able to bring about a harvest that is bigger and better than anything we could ever imagine if we just trust God to bring about a harvest. In their book, Outflow, which I should credit, this is the book that first got me to look at the parable of the sower differently. Steve Sojourn and Dave Ping, they make this remark. They say, we tend to forget the abundance of God. We keep on acting as if the seed of God's love is in precariously short supply, and as a result, we sow carefully and sparingly. But this totally goes against the Bible's clear teaching that whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Where there is little seed, there is little harvest. But you are called to be such a prodigious, indiscriminate seed flinger that your love goes everywhere. I love that word, prodigious. For me, it's like Bill and Ted. Prodigious, man. That's our mission. Should you choose to accept it this season of Lent, our mission is to be prodigious, indiscriminate, faithful flingers of God's love. To let our love go everywhere in the world. The beautiful thing about a seed is that a seed is small. It doesn't have to be some grand act. I mean, you can plant a seed in just a few minutes. You can plant a seed with a smile or a word of encouragement. You can plant a seed by getting up early and making breakfast for your family. You can plant a seed by writing someone a note or calling someone that you haven't spoken to in quite a while. You can plant a seed by surprising someone with an unexpected gift for no reason at all, just to make them happy. You can plant a seed by buying the food for the next person behind you in the drive-thru or paying for someone else's gas at the pump. You can plant a seed by ordering dessert for the young couple or the young family at the table next to you, or just leaving an extra big tip for your server. You can plant a seed by just giving 5 minutes of your time to help someone else with no expectation of return, doing a 5-minute favor. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be eloquent. All you have to do is be a faithful sower. And so that's the challenge, is every day I want you to make it your goal to plant at least one seed of God's love every day. That at the end of the day, when you look back on the day and you're giving your accounting, what did I do today? Amidst all the busyness and stress and worry, you can point to, in that moment, for those few minutes, I wasn't focused on myself. I was planting God's love somewhere in the world. Every day, at least once. And maybe you start to enjoy it, and once becomes twice, becomes 3 times, becomes 4 times. Because the more we plant seeds, the funny thing is the first return we receive, I think, is in our own heart. that we begin to see how God begins to shape and plant in us the heart of a sower. And so here's how we're going to celebrate that every week in worship when we gather. You notice that we didn't do the offering yet. We didn't pass the plates like we usually do, or the baskets. We're going to change it up for the season of Lent. We're going to bring our offering forward, and we're going to place it in the baskets that you see along the front. This is the way they celebrate offering in many cultures and churches around the world. But here's the thing. We're not just going to bring forward our checks or our envelopes with money. We're also going to bring forward seeds. You would have noticed as you came in these bushel baskets that all have seeds in them. And so the goal is that as you plant God's love in the world during the week, when you come to worship, when you come to our time of offering, you'll take a handful of seeds, one representing each act of kindness, each seed that you have planted during the week. Because that's our offering. Not just to give God our checks, but to give him our time, our heart, our love, reaching out into the world. And you'll bring those forward and you'll place them in the clear jars you see along the front. And as you do so, we want to encourage you to share the story. So capture pictures, capture the story, post it on Facebook or Instagram or email it into our church. If you post it, use the hashtag Sown. And that way we can grab them, because we want to celebrate all the ways in which God's love is being planted in our families, in our community, and in the world. And it's not about kind of patting ourselves on the back or puffing ourselves up. That's not why we share those stories. We share them because I believe this kind of lifestyle is contagious, that God calls every single one of us to be flingers of seed. And the more we tell the story of what God is doing in our midst, the more others will join in the fun. And so today, what I want you to do, since you didn't know you were going to get this challenge, I want every person to pick up one seed as we come to our offering. And this one seed, it represents the way God's love has been planted in our hearts. And you know in your own life the way in which you feel like God has planted his love in you. It also represents our commitment that we want to take what God has given us and return it to the world 30, 60, 100-fold. And so what you'll do is you'll bring one seed forward along with your offering. You place your one seed in the glass jar, and then you'll pick up a bracelet. Looks like this. It's a little metal bracelet that says Sown. And this is your reminder throughout the week to remind yourself that you are called to be a prodigious, indiscriminate flinger of seed, to take God's love and sow it out into the world. I know on our own, maybe our seed doesn't amount to much. Like, say I do what I just said. Say I forget one day, 5 days out of the week though, I do one intentional act of love. That's only 5 seeds. That's not very much. But you multiply that 5 times the 600 to 700 people who worship here every week. What if every single one of us commits to making 5 acts of love during the week? Suddenly, that becomes 3,000 or 3,500. What if we do that all Lent? And what if it grows and grows and grows? What if suddenly we're returning to God a blessing of 10,000, 20,000 acts of love intentionally done in his name and in his hope? Do you see how God will multiply and bring about the harvest if we are faithful to sow the seed? You know, I don't know that I'm not as bold as Bob Buford. I don't think I could ever put on my epitaph 100x because, well, I've received too many blessings to think about multiplying. It would crush me, I think. But I do hope when I get to the end of my time on this earth that I will hear those words that are described in Scripture. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. And if we all get to hear that, isn't it enough? And we can leave the harvest in God's hands, who is able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or think in his name. Amen. Will you join me in a word of prayer? Almighty God, we give you thanks for the way in which your seed has been sown in our hearts, whether it's through our parents or our grandparents or through our Sunday school teachers or just through random acts of kindness that we have received. We have been so blessed, oh God, by your love. And we ask, God, that we can, during this season of Lent, turn our hearts and our minds outward to consider how we can return that love and share it with others. Make us, oh God, into faithful, indiscriminate sowers of seed, just like your Son. For it is his leadership and his example whom we follow. We thank you, O God, for the faithfulness of your Son, and we offer our prayer in his name that we might be more and more like him. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.